You see it everywhere. Drive through any American city at night and you'll see people hustling, delivering food, picking up freelance coding gigs, or shipping products from their living rooms. Building a second income stream is practically a cultural expectation in the US right now. But if you hold an H1B visa, that expectation hits a hard legal boundary. Your work authorization in the United States is tied exclusively to one sponsoring employer, and you are only approved to perform the specific role they hired you for. Stepping outside of that boundary is not a minor infraction. If you perform unauthorized work, the consequences are severe and binary. USCIS can cancel your visa entirely and initiate deportation proceedings. The standard side hustle advice you see online is a direct path to losing your life in America. The line you cannot cross comes down to a specific legal distinction. Unauthorized labor is when you trade your time for money from a U.S. source. Authorized asset utilization, on the other hand, is when you trade your capital to generate a yield. My goal today is to give you a strategic framework to understand these boundaries. I am not an immigration attorney, and you must consult one before starting any new income activity. But understanding how the system is structured will save you time and money when you do sit down with legal counsel. A U.S. citizen can legally clock out of their day job and immediately start working for themselves without limits. An H1B holder does not have that freedom. Your professional time is restricted. This comparison table shows exactly what that restriction looks like in practice. You cannot take a freelance project on Upwork. You cannot drive for Uber or deliver for DoorDash. And while you can legally own a US-based LLC, you cannot actively run it or perform the daily work required to make it profitable. On an H1B, your wealth potential is limited only by the method you use to generate it. Because active labor is restricted, wealth building must shift permanently toward passive asset generation. To figure out which strategies actually work, we can map out the options on this chart. We're weighing the legal and tax complexity of an activity on the bottom against how much you can actually scale that income on the side. The safest place to start is down here in the bottom left quadrant. This is the pure passive strategy. The inputs here are purely financial. You park your existing capital into high-yield savings accounts, build a portfolio of dividend ETFs, and utilize standard brokerage accounts to buy and sell stocks. Because you are investing rather than working, this path is 100% USCIS compliant. You generate yield and compound your wealth with zero active labor involved. The trade-off is mathematical. To generate meaningful monthly cash flow, you need a substantial amount of upfront capital, and your returns are entirely reliant on whatever the current market interest rates happen to be. If you want to increase your scalability, we move slightly up the chart to the real estate play. You purchase a property, collect monthly rent from tenants, and build equity over time as the mortgage is paid down. But the strict legal limitation remains. You cannot actively manage that property as a business. If you are fixing toilets, finding tenants, and handling maintenance, immigration authorities can classify that as unauthorized labor. To stay compliant, you have to sacrifice a portion of your profit margins to hire a professional property management company. They handle the daily operations, ensuring your income classification stays strictly passive. The entire safe zone relies on a single principle. You must trade your capital, not your time, to guarantee your wealth growth remains compliant. But what if you have a lot of free time and very little capital? That brings us to the upper right quadrant, which introduces significantly more legal ambiguity. This is the gray zone of the digital creator. The inputs here are creative. You spend your free time producing digital assets, recording a YouTube video, writing an ebook, or filming an online course. You create the asset once. Those assets then generate recurring ad revenue or passive royalties for months or years, without any ongoing active work on your part. Immigration authorities intensely scrutinize this path. The creation of the content blurs the line between unauthorized work and a personal hobby. To survive in this zone, you have to establish strict operational boundaries. You cannot form a business entity around the channel. You cannot actively invoice clients for sponsorships. You must structure the entire endeavor strictly as a hobby that simply happens to generate royalty income. The income scales highly, but the true cost of operating in this gray zone is the upfront legal fees you will need to pay an attorney to ensure your setup can actually withstand an audit. There is one final strategy that attempts to step entirely outside of U.S. employment restrictions, while you physically remain inside the United States. This is geo-arbitrage. The mechanism involves providing remote services strictly to non-U.S. companies and receiving your payments directly into a foreign bank account. Looking at our chart, this sits in the extreme top right corner. This covers activities like consulting remotely for Indian startups or teaching students via India-based platforms. While it bypasses USCIS restrictions on U.S. labor, it introduces massive regulatory friction. You are now dealing with international tax treaties and dual taxation reporting requirements. You also trigger mandatory compliance rules, like the FBR, which dictates that you must report foreign bank accounts to the IRS once they exceed specific balance thresholds. And the legal risk is catastrophic if you make a mistake. If you accidentally invoice a U.S. entity or even service a U.S.-based client while attempting this strategy, you have committed unauthorized employment on American soil. Geo-arbitrage makes active income possible, but it is only viable if the money you project to make heavily outpaces the expensive CPA and legal fees you will need to pay for regulatory compliance. Because of complex legal variables, you can't use a one-size-fits-all approach. Select a strategy matching your resources. This decision tree breaks it down. If you're in a senior medical or tech role, you're likely time-poor but capital-rich. Your path routes to maximizing pure passive strategies. You already have a high-paying career. It makes zero sense to risk your primary immigration status for a few $1,000s in side hustle cash. You must stick to safe, compounding investments. If you are a junior analyst or a recent graduate, you might be capital poor but time rich. Your path routes toward the digital creator gray zone, provided you secure legal counsel to structure it properly. And if you have a deep network outside the U.S., you should only pursue the geo-arbitrage path if you have the budget to pay for complex cross-border tax accounting. Regardless of which path you choose, every strategy on this timeline points toward the exact same goal. Phase 1 and 2 are preliminary steps leading to Phase 3, the EAD. The EAD is the Employment Authorization Document. It is an open market work permit that you acquire during the later stages of the green card process. The moment you hold that document, the H1B restrictions legally dissolve. You can finally start an LLC, run a business, take gig work, and build wealth with absolute freedom. These strategies are temporary measures to sustain wealth building until your status changes. Never jeopardize a lucrative U.S. career for quick gig economy cash. Patience, strict legal adherence, and asset accumulation are the only definitive ways to secure your financial future while on an H1B.